Introduce our guests in this program. We'll have founder of American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane, out of Washington, D.C., and publisher and editor of the Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, is joining us out of London. Good to see you both, gentlemen. Now, Michael, relations between Russia and China have reached a level never seen before. What's the strategic importance of this deepening relationship?
Well, I think you can divide this newfound cooperation between Russia and China into two different segments. The first is they actually have deals and cooperation they can do with each other, particularly on the trade and economic center, that are genuinely a mutual advantage to both countries. So I think they will continue to look at that. They'll continue to pursue it. They've already got some deals in place. And that will bring them together on a natural, not contrived kind of basis. But the second one is they both have a adversarial relationship with the United States. And under the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even though there are definitely differences and things to be worked out between Russia and China, if they both look at the United States as their primary adversary, that gives them a very significant reason and motivation to work with each other, to cooperate with each other, and to find ways that they can act in concert, or even, you know, not necessarily in concert, but sort of doing the same thing to cause the United States problems.
Interesting. Now, to London, to Marcus. Since 2013, President Putin and President Xi have met almost 30 times, as you just heard. To what extent are these growing ties between these two countries the result of U.S. policies?
Well, there's no question about it that Russian-Sino relations are at an all-time high, and there are a number of factors in accounting for that, and of course one of them is American aggression. Russia feels very, very anxious about NATO in Eastern Europe, and China feels very anxious about the growing American naval presence in the South China Sea, and both Moscow and Beijing are very concerned at the American missile defense system, which is based in South Korea, which is without any doubt aimed at the Russian strategic nuclear deterrent and also at the Chinese nuclear strategic deterrent. So the American factor is very important in having brought Russia and China to such a very, very close level. But then there are other important factors: trade and investment. So last year, trade between Russia and China amounted to $107 billion, and there is without a doubt scope for more trade to come into place between Russia and China. So, for example, Russia has vast natural resources such as water, and China lacks water. And if the Russians are able to start supplying the Chinese with water, which is vital for the Chinese economy, then the Russians will be on to a financial winner. But, and this is a big but, and I know that this is going to disappoint some viewers who are under the impression that Russia and China are going to come together and isolate America, bankrupt America. Well, that is not going to happen. Why? Because despite the high levels in relations between Russia and China, there is mutual distrust. It was only in the late 60s that there were border battles between the two countries. Right. The Soviet Union contemplated a nuclear strike against China, and also the Russians are very conscious of how the Chinese economy is integrated with the American economy. So in short, if I can just get this in, it is not in the interests of China to get into a confrontation with America. Why? Because over the last 40 years, the Chinese have performed nothing short of a miracle in transforming its economy into a global one. And that has been based on its trade and investment with America. So China will not do anything that could jeopardize its economic relationship with America, because if it did do that, then the Chinese economy would be in serious trouble.
Okay. Now, Michael, let's turn attention to another aspect. Forget about trade for now. President Putin has stressed that his country shares the same ideal over many geopolitical issues with China, including the Iran nuclear deal, tensions on the Korean Peninsula, the crisis in Venezuela, and also the war in Syria. Does this symbiosis kind of challenge the U.S.?
It does and it doesn't. I really don't think Russia and China have those things in common. For instance, let's just single out Venezuela for a second. Why does China care about Venezuela at all? It's not near to it. It doesn't have a relationship with it. It doesn't need anything from it. The reason China is backing the Maduro regime in Venezuela is because it's in the thorn of the side of the Trump administration. Russia, of course, would like to establish a presence in this hemisphere, so they have a little bit more of a thing. But those areas geopolitically across the globe where you see China and Russia cooperating, it's not that they have, I don't think, an overwhelmingly similar view of the way the world should be. I think they have an overwhelmingly need to cooperate or to be seen to be cooperating with each other to create difficulties for the United States and to be a thorn in President Trump's side.
All right, Marcus, let's have also your comments. Some of those issues, maybe the Iran nuclear deal is a different thing that China and Russia agree on.
Well, there's no question about it. There are fundamental issues in the world that put Moscow and Beijing, or where they are both of the same opinion. And for example, the JCPOA is something that Russia fully supports, and Russia has made it very clear that America, by walking away from the agreement, has increased tension in the Middle East, and Russia has complimented Iran on fully adhering to the JCPOA agreement. China and Russia are also extremely concerned over religious terrorism, hence why Russia intervened at the request of the legal Syrian government to fight terrorism. And of course, the Chinese have given their full backing to the Syrian government in their fight against terrorism. Now, you might ask, why is China, what does China have to be concerned about over religious terrorism? Well, in the westernmost province of China, Xinjiang, there is quite a serious terrorist threat facing the Chinese authorities. Almost on a weekly basis, the Chinese army and the Chinese police force are monitoring separatists there, separatists who do have links to Al-Qaeda and to ISIS. And the Chinese, like the Russians, are fully aware that America has a long-standing relationship with radical extremists, with people such as bin Laden, with people who are operating in Syria today under the banner of Al-Qaeda and under the banner of ISIS. So the Chinese and the Russians have that in common.
Right. Now, Michael, trade-wise, China is in the middle of fighting a trade war that President Donald Trump has waged. Is this not an incentive for Beijing to turn to Moscow?
Okay, first I'd like to say that there wasn't much I can agree with. In fact, I think I disagree with almost everything that Marcos said in that previous answer. We just have a totally different perspective on that. But given the United States trade dispute with China at this particular point in time, yes, China is looking to diversify its economic and trade relationships with other countries around the world. But as Marcos correctly pointed out, their transformation and their growth over the last 40 years has been almost solely due to their economic relationship with the United States and their trade relationship with the United States. Now, they don't want to jeopardize that, and they don't want to lose it. Over time, they can supplement it. Over time, they can diversify so they're not as dependent on it. But right now, President Trump has all the cards in his hand. President Xi knows that President Trump has all the cards in his hand. President Trump intends on winning this particular discussion, let's put it that way. And I think that after some diplomatic niceties and some pain and difficulties on both sides, there will be an agreement that is closer to what President Trump is seeking than it is to what President Xi is seeking.
Now, Marcus, Russia is facing sanctions imposed by the U.S. and EU over Crimea, as you know. It also feels threatened by NATO's eastward expansion. Washington is also ignoring the INF Treaty. Russia says this is a threat to global peace. Aren't these good reasons for Moscow to forge better ties with Beijing?
Well, it was shortly after the Americans imposed those aggressive sanctions on Russia following the Ukraine crisis that Russia, of course, looked eastwards. They looked to China as a way of compensating for the economic damage that those sanctions were going to have. And 5 years on, those American and European sanctions have taken a toll on the Russian economy, though at the same time, they have given an opportunity to Russian suppliers. You know, there were simply items that Russia was importing from the West which could have been produced at home. So yes, the Russians did conclude a massive gas and oil deal with the Chinese, though I do believe that the Chinese deal, or the deal between the two, was slightly more beneficial to the Chinese. Why? Because the Russians were very, very keen to conclude a deal because they knew that those sanctions back in 2014 were going to take a toll. But I think we need to make a distinction between Russia and China. Russia and China have different missions in life. You know, China's mission is to do everything that suits China at home. And there is nothing wrong with that. And I understand why the Chinese do not want to jeopardize their economic relationship with America, because it just would be economic suicide. So that's China's mission. Russia's mission, of course, historically, is very different. Russia historically, the mission of Russia historically, is to stand up to American aggression, is to limit American aggression. And indeed, Russia is the only country in the world that can do that. They have achieved that in Syria, and so far they have achieved that in Venezuela. And as long as Russia continues to resurrect its past superpower status, then Russia will constitute a formidable bloc to American aggression in the world. China does not want to be a part of that. China will defend its national interests. It will defend its position in the South China Sea, but it does not want to take on America around the world because that is not part of China's mission.
Interesting. Now, Michael, let's look at it technology-wise. You know, Washington has banned Huawei's operation in the U.S. and told Google to impose restrictions on the Chinese tech giant. Now, Russian mobile operator is teaming up with China's Huawei to develop 5G network in Russia. Should the U.S. be worried about the erosion of its leverage over the wireless technology with China's growing 5G know-how and its massive political and economic impacts?
Well, I think, again, I'd like to bifurcate this into two different issues. The first is the economic, American technology companies having the opportunity to do something versus being beaten out on the economic battlefield by other companies, in this case, Huawei. You know, certainly the United States would like to see U.S. companies play a significant role in building out Russia's 5G network. Huawei is going to take the lead. They're going to do things. Kudos to them for their win on that economic battlefield and their ability to take the lead now in doing that in Russia as far as we can see. The second thing, of course, that the United States is concerned about, particularly with Huawei, as President Trump has made very clear, is their close relationship with the Chinese government. And are they independent from the Chinese government or not? And do they share technologies with the Chinese government? And do they share corporate secrets and technology secrets with the Chinese government and that kind of stuff? President Trump believes that they do. That's one of the reasons why he is trying to put a cage around Huawei and not let them out so they can steal all the European and American technology and give it to the Chinese government. We'll see whether or not President Putin becomes afflicted with the same concerns about that President Trump has.
Now, Marcus, along the same lines, there was a leaked report by the U.S. National Security Council that is warning that if China dominates the telecommunications network industry and wins the race for the 5G technology, I'm quoting, it will win politically, economically, and militarily. Michael talked about the economic aspect. They also say they will win politically and militarily in addition to economically. Let's have your take.
I'm not so sure about that, and I'm not so sure that the American government is sincere when it says that. I think the Americans have made that comment for public consumption and public consumption only. Yes, of course, the Americans are concerned about China's meteoric rise in technology, but I don't think anyone on Capitol Hill is seriously of the opinion that China is going to overtake America when it comes to technology. I don't see that as something that will happen in the future. And let me give you one example. When it comes to the military sphere, that is where China is lacking concerning high tech, because the Chinese have been talking with the Russians for many, many years now about Moscow supplying the Chinese military with high technology. So, for example, the Chinese have a 5th generation fighter plane. The Chinese have put it in the air on their own, which is a very, very big achievement. But in the cockpit, the Chinese do not have high-tech components, and the Chinese are asking the Russians to sell them high-tech components. Now, the Russians won't sell them that. Why? Because the Russians are concerned that they could be strengthening a country which could, in the long run, be an adversary to Russia. Because Russia and China, I would say, are strong allies. I wouldn't say they're strong friends. So yes, China has made big advances in technology, but in the military sphere, the Chinese Liberation Army is lacking, and they are dependent still on Russia. Russia has sold them high-tech components, but they're not giving them what the Chinese want.
All right. On that note, we come to the end of this program. Let me thank our guests. We had founder of American Institute for Foreign Policy, Michael Lane from Washington, D.C., and publisher and editor of the Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, who joined us from London. Thank you for watching this debate. I was your host, Larry Zanchev, and I will see you next time.